Today's devotion comes from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 1. Be careful to follow every command I'm giving you today, so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land that the Lord promised on oath to your forefathers. As you probably know, this book of the Bible is sort of a written account of Moses' farewell speech to the Israelites just before they are to cross into the promised land. And as we know, Moses is not going to finish this journey with them. In this 8th chapter, we find Moses admonishing the people to heed his rendering of God's commandments. In large part, Moses is reminding them that while they had some hard times, God never abandoned them. Yes, there were times the people thought they'd been abandoned. There were times they even thought God was punishing them. Moses sometimes held a similar opinion about how God reacted to their disobedience during that 40-year trek. I sometimes wonder at the interchangeability of the words command, commandment, rule, and law in the scriptures. I think you know there's some theological scholars that think guidelines might be included in that interchangeability set. It's my opinion that this is an acceptable inclusion in some instances. I will say this though, even when God is commanding an action, it is in fact a guideline for harmony within his creation. It's my belief that God is telling us how his universe works when it comes to humanity. So if we were to actually take those guidelines for what they are, instructions for smoothly interfacing with God's plan, his creation, and our world, we will find the adverse consequences disappeared from our lives. It is the disappearance of negative consequences of our interaction with the temporal realm that we often see as miracles, the mercy of God, or answers to prayer to the Almighty. Let me make what I am saying a bit clearer. There are natural rules or laws of the temporal realm that are the fabric of creation as placed by God. As humans, we tend to be more than a little dense when it comes to recognizing the natural order of this universe. We tend to not only not see the obvious smooth path God gives us if we follow his plan, but we tend to believe we actually can bend these rules to our liking. I rather imagine that you have some familiarity with instances where either you or someone you know has believed this to be the point of trying to control some little corner of God's creation. How'd that turn out for you? I know how it turns out for me when I get conceited enough to believe I can control any of God's creation. So we find Moses relaying God's rules of the world, this temporal realm, to the Israelites as commands. Since such commands are perceived as an infringement of a person's individual control of self and their world, there must be some incentive to blend the will of someone else, even when that someone else is God. So what do we find as incentives? Well, first, we find following these commands are supposed to allow you to continue to live. I think that's a pretty good incentive. Being the absolute first level in the list of Maslow's hierarchy of need to survive. And coincidentally, if we were to need any more of an incentive, we find the last part of the first level of needs addressed, reproduction or increase. Now here's an interesting look at the possible duality of the meaning of a word, this word increase, as used or translated in this verse. Increase can surely mean procreation, reproducing the species, and the family. But in another sense, that word we find a definition of elevated comfort or wealth, increase meaning an increase to our personal resources. Both ways to look at the meaning of this word are important as incentives for mankind in general. But as the Israelites are coming out of a 40-year drought of comfort and general personal status, it has special meaning when you accept the latter possible meaning of the word, increase their comfort, status, or resources in the world. You recall, I am sure that I often say that God never works in one layer or on one level. So it is more than possible that Moses has a duality of meaning when using this term in his speech. He did mean to use it in both senses, as God was providing both to them, and shortly they would understand this better than they had for 40 years. God was about to bless them greatly and in a specific way by honoring his oath to this cadre's forefathers. As we know, God chose the Israelites as his people in a way that seemed often overlooked. They were to be the vehicle for getting God's message of love out to the world. Yes, that included the fact that Jesus was coming to us through the actual flesh lineage of the house of David, a member of this family. But it also meant that they had a special connection with God. By being able to enter into and possess the land promised, God was cementing his promise, his oath, to them and affirming this special relationship. It was a blessing, a way of increase in and of itself. Yet God always delivers more than he promises. This is a factor we should not forget. God is not just true to his word, his oath, but he always delivers on his promise of love and relationship in a manner deeper and more intense than we could ever imagine. Relationship is the keystone to God's creation, his reason for loving us and for delivering on his oath to us. Love is also the foundation for the entirety of all creation and our eternal relationship with God. But it appears that we have just one real obligation in fulfilling our end of this covenant. We must follow the rules of engagement, God's commandments, which are in their true essence nothing more than guidance of how God's plan, his creation, really works anyway. Let us pray. Father God, thank you so much for having a plan, for allowing us to be a part of this. Help us to remember that while they may be rules or laws or guidelines, whatever we think they are, they do in fact grease those rails of life if we will but use them. Help us to be a little less conceited in our thinking and a little more subservient to your universe, your world. Amen.